And at the end of that rainbow for me was a methamphetamine den because I couldn't figure out why there was no pot of gold there for me.
Hey, you beautiful people, and thanks for tuning in today. I'm excited to welcome the incredible Bridget Hilton to the show. From growing up in Flint, Michigan, to breaking into the music industry as a teenager, Bridget has always been a pioneer. She later founded LSTN Sound Company, a social good electronics company that partnered with major brands like Google and Amazon and helped over 50,000 people hear for the first time. Now a keynote speaker, co-author of Experiential Billionaire, and creator of Treasure Maps card deck, Bridget has inspired hundreds of thousands of people to pursue their dreams and live a life rich in experiences. Get ready to be inspired as we dive behind the armor with Bridget.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
You know, it was really important that you were here with me today, and I really appreciate it.
Oh, I love that.
And I say that because today this is what matters to me. Mm-hmm. It mattered that we got here, and I thought about it this morning, and I was jazzed up to get here, and here we are. And I have a question is, how do you know what matters?
I think that's a very big question, and I think it takes a lot of time to figure out for a lot of people. You know, some people are very lucky and they just know right away. But for most people, just as an example, so for my book, we did a big study of 20,000 people. And one of the questions that we asked was, what have been the most valuable things in your life? And, you know, they would tell us things after a while of thinking. They'd be like, oh, it was, you know, when I took my grandchildren on a cross-country road trip, or when I wrote my book, or when I, you know, got married and started a family. But then they would always say after that, I've never actually thought about what matters to me. So I think the answer to your question is kind of, the question is like, you have to actually sit down and think about what matters to you. And there's a lot of ways to get there, but like the first step is just thinking about it, which sounds so simple, but like we're so busy maintaining our lives that we don't sit down and actually think about what's valuable.
So for you, you grew up in Michigan, music background. And I want to talk about the moment prior to starting Listen. Take me to that moment. What was going on?
Sure. So yeah, I grew up in right around Flint, Michigan, and I don't know if you know anything about that town, but it's not exactly Hollywood. It's not. I didn't know anyone that was in the entertainment industry or anything like that. So I had this big dream of being in the music industry, but I didn't know how to get there, right? So I started doing all of these jobs when I was a kid, like, you know, picking up trash at like music venues and like getting coffee at radio stations and selling band t-shirts and stuff like that. So I did that for a long time. And then pretty much from like 14 to 19. And then when I was 19, I got a job in the mailroom at a local record label. And that really changed my entire life. Because then I started seeing all these people that were like, you know, superstars or like on their way to becoming superstars. And it really like opened my mind to like what was possible. Like I didn't have a lot of expectations on like what I would have been, you know, like I didn't know anyone that had been super successful in like a financial or in like a philanthropic or any type of way, right? Everyone was just like really normal where I grew up. So being in the music industry like changed everything for me, and it made me see like what I could be and that I could be something bigger than that.
Fair to say though, at this moment, you're not quite sure what exactly mattered in your life.
Yeah, I mean, I really thought that when I was growing up, I thought that, you know, music was the only thing that mattered. I was obsessed. Like my email address was literally rockstarwannabe@aol.com. like that's all I cared about. Like it was actually kind of scary. I didn't have any other interests. So like for me growing up, I was like, all I want to do is be a rock star. Like that's the number one most important thing to my
obsession.
Life. Yeah, like an obsession. Yeah. And like I knew everything about every band, like I would go to every show. I would like, I don't even like, there's some ridiculous memories I have. Like, do you remember that band Hanson? I would like go to the mall and like pretend to be them. Like, this is like before, there was like good internet and stuff. So like people didn't know, and I looked just like them. So
It's hilarious. It's very funny.
so yeah, I thought that the only thing that matters was that. And then it's funny because like at first I'm attracted by like this allure of like fame and fortune and like having people like scream my name or whatever if I was going to be like a musician. And then once I started working with these like bigger like superstars, I realized that it wasn't that. It was that I was watching them become bigger than themselves, and they were making an impact on people's lives. Like people would come up to them and they would say things like your music saved my life, and like I walked down the aisle to your song, or I named my child after your album. And I thought, like, I want to make an impact too. Like, it's not about fame or fortune, it's about like creating something that like you can leave behind.
A legacy, but for the right reasons.
Yeah.
For so long, I wanted to build a law firm that would last long after my name, but it was only like an ego pride
Yeah.
kind of thing. Not because I was really interested in wanting to long continue our service for the community after I pass. And so for you, what rattles that in which you changed on how you perceived music as what was the only thing that mattered?
So it's kind of funny. It kind of all changed with seeing a YouTube video, which sounds very basic, but I was at work one day and just like sitting in my cubicle or whatever and like looking at YouTube, and I saw this viral video of a woman that was 29 years old, and I was like 27 at the time, or 26. And she was hearing for the first time thanks to like a special hearing aid. And it got me thinking about how important music was to me and why it was important, and that it changed my whole trajectory of my life. Like from where I was from, I moved out to LA. Like I had all these great friends. Like there was really cool experiences that I was having. Like I got to travel. I got to like meet all my idols. Like all of these things happened because I was passionate about music. So like what would have happened if I didn't have that? And like that's what I thought about when I saw that video. And then I thought like that would be such a cool job, or maybe not even the word job is like the wrong word, but like a cool pursuit to like help other people hear for the first time. So like that's kind of like what kicked off the idea of like starting Listen and like trying to become like bigger than myself in that way, like just like the artists that I had seen before.
Tell us a little about Listen.
Sure. So Listen is a headphone and speaker company. We started in 2012. And we give the proceeds to giving people hearing around the world. So we sell like regular consumer products, and then we give hearing aids, and then we are on the road and we like actually get to do the work, which is like the best job ever. We've given around 50,000 people hearing for the first time, which is pretty crazy to say that number, because it really just all started with like seeing a video on YouTube. And we've been to 40 countries in all 50 states, and we've had really crazy adventures along the way. But it's been quite a journey. It's been 12 years. So.
Tell me about what it's like. We have a mutual friend, Justin Wren, who, when I spoke to Justin, explained the feeling of what it was like when these tribal people in Africa had first tasted or even seen fresh water come out from the ground.
Oh, I love Justin. Shout out to Justin Wren.
Right? And what's that like? What was your experience? Take me there when you first heard someone hear.
So the first time, I remember like it was yesterday. Like, so Joe, my business partner, and I were in Peru, and this was like my first time ever like in South America, and like it was all kind of a new experience, right? It was all like very overwhelming, but in a good way. And the first person that we helped just so happened to be like I remember it so clearly. Her name was Maria. She was this young girl, and she had come from probably a couple 100 miles away. Like her parents had told us that it was her biggest dream in life to be able to hear, right? So she could like connect and fit in with the other kids. And so they told us like, we were going to do anything to make this happen. And like, we've tried for years and like nothing works and we can't, they couldn't afford, hearing aids are so expensive. Like they couldn't afford that, which is pretty normal, unfortunately. And so they came from hundreds of miles away, and she sits down in this chair and she was like so nervous and so like full of anxiety, but like everyone was like hopeful. And I was in charge of fitting her hearing aids, and I like pushed them into her ear, and she just like lit up like, like a Christmas tree, just
Right, because you could tell she now.
Oh my God. It was like the different, it was like going from black and white to color, it was,
Wow.
like she just lit up and she like,
Wow.
she was like, I wish I could show you the picture.
Wow.
I'll show you later. But that was the first person we saw here for the first time. And so like her parents just collapsed on the floor, and they were like so relieved and so overjoyed, and like they were crying, and then Joe and I started crying, and then everyone's crying, and it was like this whole scene. And it was, not only was it like so amazing for her and so amazing to see that, it was like the realization of this dream that like a year prior to that, like I had seen a video on YouTube, and then we were there and seeing someone here for the first time, like because of like a business that we started. So it was like a full circle moment of realizing like somebody else's dreams, but also like our dreams at the same time. But I just think it's like the closest thing to a miracle that you can see. And it's so fast. And I think that's one of the things that I like about it, is a lot of like philanthropic pursuits they're all amazing, obviously, but some of them take years and years and years. Whereas this can be like, you can change someone's life in 10 seconds, which is crazy.
That's incredible. That's really incredible.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Our other friend, Sebastian Terry, who we just saw, right?
Love him.
I loved how he talked about the collaboration that happens, right? With service to others is that service to yourself. And so here, I'm wondering now, at this very moment where you've changed this person's life, literally, right? Who could now hear music the way you could hear music and enjoy it. What was the moment when now for you, like personally, you're like, wow, right? Here you are thinking that that being on stage, singing a rock concert to an audience, like, and then you're like, wow, what was that moment like for you?
It really just like put things in focus for me, and like what is important and what is interesting and valuable to me. Like that's, that moment just changed everything. And then it was kind of just from there, we were addicted to it. We were like, we want to do this all the time. Like we want to travel, we want to see new places, we want to help people. And it was never about like, Listen never became like, $1 billion company, but like we always say that we were like experiential billionaires, because we were doing all these things and having all these experiences, and like maybe we're not super wealthy, but I wouldn't trade those experiences for anything. Like at the end of my life, like, am I going to care about how much I made, or if I changed 50,000 people's lives? Like that's way more important. So like that moment kind of changed everything from then on.
I want to talk about that moment. I want to get really deeply under there for a moment, because I think it's so critically important for our teenagers and young 20s to hear that message. Because for me, I threw away a big part of my life pursuing the idea that if I collected a certain number of material things, as the world had promised me with exotic cars and flashy things, that I would find that happiness. And at the end of that rainbow for me was a methamphetamine den.
Yep.
Because I couldn't figure out why there was no pot of gold there for me.
You were filling a hole that with money or with possessions, and that you should have been filling it with experiences, with relationships. And I think that's very common, unfortunately.
Exactly. And so I also think that there's a big fear here that I find that particular young men, let's say, for instance, who are struggling to find out, what does it mean to be a man today? And you're 18 years old or you're 19 years old, and you go online and you find these Andrew Tates of the world, or these very dangerous, and they convert masculinity to toxic masculinity and create these wolf pack mentalities. And it's really dangerous. And for a young guy who, wants the Mr. Beast kind of lifestyle, says, I'll pass on the experience. If I can get these things, I'm promised. How do we undo this belief, this narrative?
I feel like our whole book is about this specific question, which is funny. I think you really have to take wisdom from people. Like, one thing that I've done with the book is take wisdom from older people that, are at the end of their life and they're looking back and they're saying, what has mattered to me, right? And it's never you don't go to hospitals and see people asked to see their wallet one last time, right? You don't see you're not at the cemetery. You don't see tombstones that say died with 10 million in the bank. That would be crazy if that was the case. So we only get a certain amount of time. Like, the average lifespan for a man in the US is 72, and the average lifespan for a woman is 76. So at 35, 36, you're already middle-aged, right? And that's something that a lot of young people don't think about. And I really didn't even think about it until a few years ago. But so it's a very powerful thing to just kind of, a good tool actually for that is a memento mori chart that has 72 boxes, and just look at it and you're like, okay, if I care about only making money for, 60, 70% of this, then I have only 10 years left to retire and use my money to do experiences. That's insane.
Yeah.
And so you have to think about right now is all you have. Tomorrow is not promised. So do the things that you want to do now and don't wait. And that's really the message of our book. And that can include, philanthropy, that can include relationships, that can include whatever is important to you. But it doesn't necessarily mean just make a lot of money and then that's it.
And I also think it doesn't mean just create a bucket list of things you want to do and be so focused on checking those boxes off that you forget to live every day.
Yeah, that's true. I think bucket lists are great in some ways, but so one exercise you can do to figure out what matters to you is that it's sort of like a bucket list, but not really. It's okay, imagine your doctor called and they told you that you have 1 year left to live. What would you do? Write down all those things that you would do. And it's probably not going to be the same things that are on your bucket list, right? Because those are oh, I want to go to the Eiffel Tower. Or I want to go to a lot of travel things, or a lot of, adventures, which is great. And I love all those things, but it might be things that are more important to you. I'm going to tell the people around me that I love them, or I'm going to spend more time in nature, or I'm going to mend relationships that I broke. I'm going to forgive myself for doing something really bad. Or maybe if you're spiritual, get closer to that, stuff like that. It's if you have a year or 6 months or a day left to live, you're going to think about that stuff. You're not going to think about, I want to go, to the Eiffel Tower, for example.
But I've never, until you just said that, so thank you, thought about experiences can mean these very simple, telling someone I love you is an experience, right? It's as much as you can embody that moment.
Oh, yeah.
And capture that is can be just as cool as being at the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah, I think bucket lists are cool because then it gives you a big view of oh, maybe when I'm, this age, I want to do this, or there's certain things you want to do, but really like what's really important to you will become clear if you give yourself a very limited timeline. It's like we ask that every time we do an event or a keynote or anything, like, what would you do with one day left to live? And the answers are always like, I would forgive myself, or I would, do something I can do today. And then we say, why don't you do that today? Because you don't know.
Let's assume that I want to start making a paradigm shift in how I show up tomorrow. I want to go from chasing to feeling. I want to go from having to being.
To being. Love that.
How can a listener do that?
Whew. Might need a moment on this one. I think it all comes back to like being your authentic self. And I know that word gets a lot of play right now, and it's kind of oversaid. But doing things that you want to do, not what society wants you to do, not what maybe, if you're younger, maybe necessarily what your parents want you to do. Like, you have to go be a doctor, you have to go be a lawyer, or whatever it is, that they're telling you. Like, chase your own dreams and do your own path, because that's like, at the end of the day, you're the one that has to live with those choices, like nobody else does.
I think it's surprising of how many people don't actually know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, how many of us have stopped to say, like, what is it exactly Judd wants to do today? Like, what would really be?
That's a big problem. Like, that's so common. I mean, like I said, it's like in our survey, like that was the number one, like we basically go through like 3 steps of like how to live a rich life. And that's the number one thing, is to figure out what's valuable to you, because not nobody, but most people don't know.
And there's so many reasons for that, right? I would imagine. You grow up with a set of beliefs and narratives. You're in a community, or you're being told what kind of matters. And yes, authenticity is this big buzzword today, but underneath that is just showing up as your real, raw, your true self. And for me, that was actually a process of having to find out what that looked like for Judd. Like who is Judd, and what is important to Judd? And for me, that actually started where I had to go and think about my core values, because I always thought that was a poster on a wall at a company. And I was like, my company, a core value? You asked me my core values, I would have given you my 4 law firm core values. But I had never thought about what would be my core values.
I love that. And I also think something, that sounds simple, but maybe isn't for a lot of people, is just trying new things, because you don't know what you don't know, right? Like I didn't know I would want to speak at companies. Like, I never even thought about that before, right?
Right.
But I tried it and I was like, this is really cool. I want to do this more because it's impacting people. Or I didn't know that I would want to, just simple things like make homemade pasta or pizza, or make make art, or do anything like that. Like, you don't know what you're going to like. You don't know what you're going to be good at. Even if you're not good at it, does it really matter at the end of the day? Like, I love to go surfing, but am I good at surfing? Like, no. But it's still fun, and it's like authentic to who I am. So I think young people, like you were saying, like, how do they figure it out? I think just trying as many new things as you can. And that also gets you like these relationships, which relationships are definitely the key to life and definitely the most important thing in life. So as basic as that sounds, I think just trying new things will get you there.
That really applies for an organization setting as well, right? Because what I'm hearing is healthy risk-taking.
Yeah. And I love to take a risk. I'm very much a risk taker, but I think we, like, as a society, we a lot of the time hear things like we can't be a beginner. Like, we can't, especially as we get older, right? It's like, if I want to paint a picture or sing a song when I'm 6, people are like, great, do it. But if I'm like 60, they're like, that's lame, and they don't think that's like the cool thing to do is to like start, maybe I want to do a stand-up comedy set or play a song on guitar and like I'm older. We're told that that's not like acceptable and cool because beginners are like, losers in a lot of ways. But I think that society needs to like encourage beginners and like encourage like at any age to learn new things. And like, that's what makes us grow as people.
The exponential billionaire tries new things. Part of the experience alone, right?
Yeah.
I gave that example earlier is that even starting a podcast, for me at first, it was like, I don't even know anything about audio.
Right.
You're a musician. I don't know what audio, I don't know boom mics, I didn't know anything, but
yeah,
I like storytelling and I love human connection. And so how can I apply those skills to this experience and let it roll? Maybe it'll work out.
Yeah.
The podcast doesn't. It's okay because this was just one of those experiences that accumulate a good life.
Yeah, and you're not afraid of failure because it doesn't matter, right?
Right.
Like
That's
literally,
true.
even if it failed, quote unquote, which it's not going to, but you had all these deep conversations with people, you learned something new, like you have another thing that you accomplished in your life. Like, I think it's awesome to do new things. And like, even if, there is a failure, then it doesn't matter. Like, people are way too afraid of failing. And like, the more you fail, like the more you're going to succeed in general. If you just never try, you're never going to really get anywhere. You're just going to stay on one path your whole life. But then there's all these other paths that you can go on.
And to your point, it's the experience. That's the thing that matters, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't how many downloads. It's not how many views that I'm getting. It's not how many engagement.
No.
I mean, it can be if you're really trying to make that thing. But for me, it was the experience. So whether it has, 100 episodes or it ends after this one, it's the experience of having to say, I hosted and launched a podcast that really matters.
And that really applies to businesses and entrepreneurs as well.
Yeah.
Say that you built a big company and then you sold it. It's like you can only sell it like once, right? That happens one day.
Right.
But what about the 10, 20 years you spent building it? Like, that's way more valuable
It's true.
than the one day that you get money, because like that's time that you can never get back. And that's what we always say about Listen, is like, we just don't really, like, it would have been amazing if we were like the next like Dr. Dre, Beats, whatever, of course. But we also had 10 plus years of traveling the world and helping people and like doing all of these crazy experiences that like no one else that we know has like ever done. And that was worth way more than any number in a bank account. Like, for one day to be like, okay, I sold a company, check the check mark off, So I think people need to think about, like, the journey is the destination is like so oversaid sometimes, but it really is the truth. 'Cause you're only going to be this young like today, right? Like, I'm never going to be this young again.
It's so good.
So
Right. Which is where memento mori, the Stoic principle of live your life, like,
yeah.
Wake up and say, I am so grateful I woke up.
Oh, for sure. I mean, if 72 is the average, that means there's a lot of people that don't make it to that. Like,
That's a good point.
like, you just don't know.
That's a good point. The experience behind it. It's funny because as I'm thinking about it, it was for so long how many clients I helped, but it was really about me and how I helped. The helping part of it was the stat for me as opposed to that I just did. And when I think about how your impact makes on humans and the planet, at the end of it, that impact alone can be legacy. That impact alone lasts far longer than you will be here.
Oh, for sure. And it's not even like
Wow.
at the end of, this ripple effect or whatever. It's not even about giving hearing. It's definitely not about me. That's for sure. It's about, say one kid can hear for the first time and then their whole community is impacted, right? Like now they can go to school, now they can go to work, now they can maybe they meet someone and have a family together, and like it all, it like ripples throughout things. Like we helped 50,000 people here, but there's been millions of people that have been impacted by that.
Yeah.
And then there's also been like this really cool ripple effect that happened that all of these companies started coming to us saying that we inspired them to add like social good into their own business model. And then those people like planted millions of trees and like funded cancer charities and, saved animals from shelters. And like all of these things happened because of like one little thing, like seeing a video and being inspired by that. And like that ended up with all of these other things. And that's something that literally anyone can do. Like, I'm not special. My business partner is like amazing, but we're not special. We're just normal people. We didn't come from anything. And I think the lesson is that like really anyone can start a ripple effect.
And the ripple effect can be very difficult to measure, but it is very real.
Very real.
I remember when I was getting into keynote speaking, someone had shared with me that as a speaker, when you're on the stage, sometimes you're not getting that immediate feedback. And you have to be embodied in yourself, right? But someone in that room may leave and do XYZ framework, take whatever your idea thing. And, and so it's real.
Oh, yeah.
You just may not directly know about it.
I mean, I'm pretty sure you don't know 99% of the time.
Right?
People are very shy. They don't necessarily all come up to you at the end and say something.
It's true.
They might, message you on LinkedIn like 2 years later and be like, I did this. And that's amazing. I mean, I love the people that do come up and say something immediately, but I hope that there's more than that,
Right. And I didn't even realize that hearing loss was the number one disability in the world. How much is a hearing aid, average hearing aid?
I don't know. So it's a really interesting space in business actually right now specifically. There's just been these laws that were passed that I think will be so tremendously helpful to like the whole world, which is where you can sell hearing aids over the counter. So you could go to like CVS or Rite Aid and like buy a hearing device, where before it was very guarded and like you could only go through like these big companies that were charging like $10,000 or something. So now Apple actually just added like hearing aids to like their AirPods. So it's like the ability to get something that might be like $100, $200 is so drastically different from like $10,000 that I actually think the whole space and the whole like disability part of it is going to change drastically, which is super exciting.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy that like it was just a law that needed to be passed to be able to do these things and have, more access to it, because the reality is that most people can't afford it. And that's why it's such a problem. It is easily fixable. 9 out of 10 people can be helped with just a hearing aid. And then there's other methods for the 1 out of 10 people, which, can get really expensive as well. But if 90% of that can be helped with something that's a couple $100s, like it's much more realistic to say that that will like shrink the population of people that need it.
So you're seeing technology, access, affordability is really game-changing in this space right now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if a company that's as big as Apple or Bose or whoever can change that, then that will be so helpful for the whole world. And it's crazy. It's not like, water or education or something where it takes like years. Like if someone can help, in 10 seconds with like a little device, like that's going to change so many people's lives.
Tell me, is there something about your journeys in 40 countries that stands out?
I think there's different things, like as terms of like I love nature, so I'll go there first. seeing the Northern Lights blew my mind. Seeing, like, going on safari blew my mind, like, completely. Like, that was probably my favorite thing I've ever done in my life.
Where did you go on a safari?
I've been a couple times in Kenya, which is
I went to
fantastic, in the Masai Mara.
Masai Mara,
It's
Mombasa.
yeah. Oh, nice.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I mean,
Nairobi.
blew my mind. Just unbelievable.
Masai Mara is lion country.
Oh, yeah. We saw a lot of lions. I had a very close call with a lion. I almost got hunted. Yeah, there's a story in the book about that. It's really funny about how, I mean, this lion like literally like stared into my soul. And it was like, I never had felt hunted by like an animal before. And wow, it was a very intense experience. And I was freaking out. And then afterward, like we were hanging out with the Maasai like tribesmen, and they were telling us like, oh, don't worry about the lion. It's the hippo that you need to worry about.
Yes. Right. Right.
And so we put that story in our chapter about fear, because sometimes you think it's going to be one thing and then it's another thing that's actually the, the dangerous part. But
where'd you see the Northern Lights?
In Iceland. It was just one of the most amazing experiences of my life. But I would say anywhere that I can like get out and do those things that are just very real and very like, you know, have been around for millions of years, like animals and nature is like my favorite. I also like the experience. It's funny, I've been to 40 some countries, but the United States, like I love the US and I've been to all 50 states. And I think that was one of the best experiences of my life is seeing every state, because, and you know, we're in a very divisive time right now, obviously, with the election and everything. But after the after 2016 election, I made it my goal to like finish all the states and talk to people in every state and like kind of get their story. And that was one of the best experiences of my life, because I now feel like I understand like way more, like why people think the way that they think. Like they're not crazy or terrible people. It's just that like they grew up differently than me, or they had different experiences. And now I have like way more empathy for like people that have different views or different, you know, ways of thinking. And yeah, the US is really beautiful as well. So I encourage everyone to try to hit
It's
that.
funny how many of us live in the United States and have visited other countries before seeing all the
Oh my gosh.
states, right?
So many people. I don't remember the stat.
I'm at fault there. I'm one
I
of
think
them.
most people have seen less than, I think the average is like 7 to 9 states.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, because at one point I had this idea that I was going to go around to all the states, and then I was going to look for a pattern of what states, or particularly communities, like the native in Alaska to, you know, the Cuban community in Miami, all the different sense of subset communities across America, and look at which ones are thriving in connection and which ones were struggling in connection. And then I wanted to think about, could I understand why these communities are stronger or weaker in that particular area? And I was thinking, because I haven't done it, but I'd like the experience, that there was a sense of belonging to the communities that had strong connection, either ethnically, passion-wise, culture.
I think
What's your experience on that?
I think that sounds like a great idea, and I think that you should write a book about it, honestly. And maybe do a Netflix show, because I would watch that for sure. It's kind of like taking the blue zones or something like that, but making it about connection.
Yeah.
And the blue zones, to me, I'm like, I don't know if I believe it that much, but I think that connection-wise, it would be more interesting to make
What's
it
your
about
theory? If I went around and I'm going to tell you, here's the results, what's your theory?
I don't think everyone would agree with me on this, but I think that, and I'm not a very religious person, but I think that religion really does bring people together and like have community. especially when people get older, or especially when they have children. You're like, so I think a good example of that is like, I've had grandparents pass away, like, semi recently. And if you go to the funeral and they have all of these people like from the church there, it's all these people that they have like connection with,
Right.
like, they saw every Sunday. What other opportunity does someone that's elderly have to have that community if they're not like in a home with a lot of other people or whatever?
Right.
And then the same for kids a lot of times, say like in a city or something where there's like, it's harder to gather. Like if you have kids and you take them to church every, Sunday, or maybe that could even be like at a soccer team or whatever, but there has to be like a place to gather where you're like, you are seeing these people consistently, and maybe it's not church, maybe it's something completely different. But I think that you'll find like where there's communities like that people are more strongly together. Like where I live, like honestly, like I don't even know my neighbors. I don't like, I might have met them a couple times, right? And I've felt that way in a lot of different places that I've lived. But maybe if I, was a part of something like a team in my community or like a church in my community, like I would know those people and they would show up for me and I would show up for them.
That's so interesting. I think you're right. Because when you're saying that, I think about when I was living in particularly the city, New York City or Miami. I had a group of people, but I was overall less connected to a community. I didn't know any of my neighbors in the hallway. I tried not to see anybody in the elevator. It's almost like you're avoiding as opposed to attracting or connecting. Yeah. But to your point, it's anchoring. It's like anchoring in a common thing. Religion is probably the easiest one.
The oldest one. Yeah, so it's the easiest one to reference. But there's other.
But there are, right?
Other things, yeah.
Yeah, and and where I think you're onto it is because my theory would be that the strongest connected communities are one that drive the lowest loneliness rate.
Yes. And I think cities in general are lonelier in a way. I don't come from a big city, and like when I go home, I can go to the grocery store and I see people that, I went to high school with or whatever. And like, not saying that that's necessarily what I even want, but they are closer than the people in the cities. Yeah.
And also I could be running into many people at work, and yet your grandparents or, who may have been deeply invested in the church on a weekend are less lonely than I am, right?
Sure.
It's not how many people you're interacting with, because I think the stat shows something like we all will run into 50 or 70,000 people in our course of our life. Yeah. 50 to 70,000 people the average person will connect with, or meaning even in an Uber, count that as one person. Running into new people.
Yeah.
50 to 70,000 people in the course of an average lifetime.
Wow.
But how many of those are we really connected with?
Not many.
Yeah, not many. And so it's like, it seems like the most or the more connected communities are the less lonely because they're anchoring in a common purpose or passion.
Yeah, I think you have to have a common purpose or passion. That's exactly right. So what does that mean in different states or different countries? Different things.
Yeah.
But, it could be family-based, it could be religion-based, it could be interest-based, but there has to be something. Like, I don't feel, I love LA. Like, I've been here since I was 21. It's like my home, but I definitely don't feel like there's like a big community aspect to it necessarily.
Right.
The same with New York or, Chicago or Seattle or whatever.
How often do we have to take a what matters survey? Right? Because, if I think about it, if I stopped and really did the questions that you're asking, those hard questions, I think the answer to my question today, with if I had a day left, would be different than even a year ago.
I agree. Because you're growing every day. You're experiencing new things. And like, I know that you you love like self-growth and all of that stuff. So I think it's really good if it changes. Like what I wanted when I was younger, like, no. Like I'm so much more like, simple in a lot of ways. Like I would love to just like hang out and eat my favorite thing with the people that I love or do something. You know what I mean? Like I don't need anything crazy. I don't need it like a big
Totally.
anything.
Totally. And it's just like a litmus test. It's like almost like I'm hearing be intentional about thinking about how you want to spend your time.
Yes.
Your most valuable
asset.
Resource, right? Yeah. That depletes every day.
No matter who you are.
No matter who you are.
No one's like living to be 1,000 years old. Like,
and so how it's waking up. Thank you for waking up. And then now, how do I want to spend this time intentionally so that at the end of the day, I could draw it up as another experience, good or bad?
Being very intentional is kind of my whole thing right now. Like I want to be intentional about what I'm spending my time on. There's nothing more important than time. Money is not important in relativity to time. So, yeah.
And speaking of, I cannot thank you have for spending your time with me today.
Of course.
It has been incredible.
I love it here.
I have a question for you. Beyond the million people that I believe you have helped, from the 40 to 50,000 that now can hear the music you played in that piano in the mall in Michigan, you really changed lives.
Thank you.
You're doing so much for organizations and companies, speaking. How do you most authentically connect with yourself?
I would say nature. I'm very big on spending a lot of time in nature. I live basically on the beach. I mean, I live in an apartment. I don't live on the sand, but I spend a lot of time outside by the ocean. Anytime I can, take the chance to be in the mountains or in the trees or anything like that, I feel most at peace and most at home and like the most authentic version of myself. And another way I feel that way is to not, like, I know everything that I said today is very serious, but I'm really actually not a super serious person because I do realize that we're all so short on time. And to not take everything so seriously and to have a good time is the most important thing to me. Like, I love to laugh, I love to smile, and I love to, like, just kind of be silly and ridiculous. And that's how I feel like most authentic to me.
I love my time that I spent with you today.
I loved it. Let's do it again.
Thanks so much for coming on.
Of course.
Now I'm a hugger. So that's a wrap.
I want to extend my deepest gratitude to you. If you've enjoyed this episode, please follow us on your favorite platform or share this episode with a friend. You can also follow me on Instagram at Judd Shaw Official. A special thank you to personal injury law firm Judd Shaw Injury Law for their support in helping us bring this podcast to life. Remember, friends, authenticity isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. It's about embracing our vulnerabilities, celebrating our strengths, and owning our stories. Until next time.